Why, hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Amélie. I am a researcher in death history. I also have a full-time job, a small business, and many part-time jobs. And on this channel, I like to talk about my research and I like to talk about academia and being a busy bee and managing a lot of things at once. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, make sure you hit the follow button below because I am planning on posting a lot more videos in the coming weeks. I have come up with a lot of new different topics and scripts and I look forward to sharing that with you. So if that's of interest to you, subscribe below. So today I really want to talk to you about one of my favorite topics ever. It was actually the subject of my Bachelor's of History honors thesis. I do have a script put together because otherwise I will geek out and just ramble on for hours. But without further ado, I'm going to talk to you about Henrietta Duterte. So historians all have like one person that they're completely obsessed with. For some people, it's like Marie Curie. For others, it could be Alexander the Great. Whomever, you know, the historical figure where if you ask them a completely unrelated question, somehow they'll find a way to bring them up anyway. That's what happens to me when I talk about Henrietta Duterte. And the thing is that you probably have never heard of her, and I find that absolutely criminal because Henrietta Duterte was the first woman in America to own and operate a funeral home. She was a Black businesswoman in 19th century Philadelphia. She spent over 40 years caring for the dead, and she may even have helped enslaved people escape to freedom using coffins and funeral processions. She's very real, and yet somehow she is completely forgotten. So today I wanted to tell you why I think Henrietta Duterte is one of the most fascinating people in American history and why I ended up writing my honors thesis about her. To understand Henrietta, we first need to understand Philadelphia. She was born around 1817 into a free Black family living in Philadelphia's famous 7th Ward. This was one of the most vibrant Black communities in the United States at the time, but it was also a place, of course, of extraordinary racial violence. Pennsylvania had technically abolished slavery decades earlier, but freedom was absolutely not equal. And Black Philadelphians experienced discrimination, riots, attacked on their homes and their churches, and constant threats also from slave catchers searching for escaped enslaved people. Henrietta grew up legally free, but she also knew and felt her freedom could be challenged at almost any moment, and that was the world that she grew up in. Now, Henrietta was not born into obscurity. The Bowers family, her birth family, was quite successful. Her father was active in church leadership. Her brothers were abolitionists. One helped establish educational organizations for Black Philadelphians. Another became a nationally famous singer. And the church they attended, AME St. Thomas, was deeply involved in abolitionist networks. So Henrietta grew up surrounded by people who believed that your community is not just something that you belong to, it was also something that you had a responsibility to care for. Originally, Henrietta worked as a seamstress and a tailor. Then she married Francis Duterte. Francis opened a funeral home in 1852. He was a carpenter and he made coffins, and then that developed into a full-blown brick and mortar business. But 7 years later, tragedy struck. Francis died of tuberculosis. Henrietta at the time was 41 years old, and instead of selling the business and instead of remarrying and stepping away from public life, she took over the funeral home herself. It became called H.S. Duterte Funeral Home, and that made her the first woman in the United States to own and operate a funeral home. Now, today seeing a woman funeral director is not necessarily unusual, but in the mid-1800s, it was actually almost unheard of because death care was changing dramatically. For centuries, preparing the dead had been women's work inside the home because it was care work. But during and after the Civil War, funerals became super commercialized, and professional undertakers, who were almost all men, began replacing family members in caring for the dead. Henrietta occupied both worlds. She represented the older tradition of women caring for the dead, but she was simultaneously becoming one of America's first professional funeral directors. So she was not just entering a male profession, but she was at the same time helping define it. One thing that struck me throughout my research about Henrietta was that she didn't just own a profitable business. No, she did own a very profitable business, but she also, evidence indicates to her actually caring genuinely. Newspapers repeatedly describe her willingness to serve the rich and the poor. She handled funerals for Black and white families alike, something that was not common at the time. Even into her 80s, only days before her own death, she was still arranging funerals. The day before she died, she arranged the funeral of a 5-year-old boy. Imagine spending your final days comforting another grieving family well into your 80s. That is a beautiful and extraordinary story. And that leads us to the story that everyone remembers. Well, those who know her remember. Supposedly, Henrietta Duterte helped enslaved people escape slavery by hiding them inside coffins and inside funeral processions. Because funeral processions could move through cities without attracting much attention. Death created this strange social taboo, and people generally didn't inspect coffins. And if that's true, Henrietta used society's discomfort with death as camouflage, and that is a really incredible story. But things become interesting because there's no surviving primary source that actually proves she did this. This story first appears in historian Charles Bloxham's work in the 1980s, and then after that, her name becomes associated with it in books and blogs and podcasts and YouTube videos. Even official Philadelphia documents now describe Henrietta as an Underground Railroad operative. At some point, she was even on a mural that showed the Underground Railroad and important members of it in Philly. But no contemporary record has ever been found that can confirm this story. So did it happen? As historians, we have to be comfortable with uncertainty. Could she have done it? Absolutely. The evidence is circumstantial, but it is very compelling. She was, one, deeply connected to abolitionist networks. She personally knew figures associated with the Underground Railroad. Her funeral home would have been uniquely suited to covert transportation. William Still, the famous Underground Railroad chronicler, knew Henrietta personally. And there's also other documented escapes that involve hiding inside coffin-like containers, like the story of Henry Box Brown. So while we unfortunately can't say with certainty that Henrietta hid fugitives inside coffins, we should not dismiss the very, very, very real and likely possibility just because documentation is missing, especially when we're dealing with Black women's history, which is a field where archives are notoriously incomplete. And this is actually what my honors thesis became about. At first, I just wanted to write a sort of historical biography, if you will, of Henrietta, but I ended up writing about absence because much of Henrietta's life was not recorded. We have no diary, very few letters, only one surviving photograph, very little surviving business records. But that's certainly not because her life was not important. It's because history decides whose lives are worth preserving. Black women often disappear from the archives. This absence is something that historian Saidiya Hartman calls archival violence. And sometimes what survives a story, or rather what doesn't survive a story, tells us as much as what does. Henrietta matters for so many reasons. Number one, she was not simply an entrepreneur. She demonstrates something profound about death. She demonstrates that funeral directors historically have not only cared for bodies, especially Black funeral directors, they also were pillars in their communities. Through funerals, Henrietta built networks between churches and neighborhoods. She did accumulate wealth, but she used it to support churches, charitable organizations, to help vulnerable people, and she might also have very likely helped people escape slavery. And in this scenario, and in many scenarios that I find in my research, death is not separate from activism. Death, as a matter of fact, made activism possible in many ways. And here's the saddest part. I visited Philadelphia. I went looking for Henrietta, but the funeral home is gone. There are no historical markers dedicated to Henrietta. There's no statue, no museum. Her funeral home has been replaced with modern condos. Her grave still exists, of course, but one of America's most remarkable women is almost invisible. And ironically, she survives today mostly through the internet, like this video. Small blogs, history enthusiasts, YouTube videos, like Caitlin Doty from Ask a Mortician made a video about her that got a lot of traction. Social media posts, people are discovering Henrietta and are trying to reconstruct the life of someone that history has almost erased, and to give her back the voice that she deserves. And to conclude, as historians, we spend a lot of time talking about kings and presidents and politicians and generals. And Henrietta reminds us that some of history's most important people spent their lives doing things that are much quieter. They helped families bury the people they loved. They created dignity out of grief. They built community through death. Whether or not every legendary story about her is true, Henrietta deserves to be remembered. And she will always be my favorite historical person. So that's Henrietta. If you enjoyed this video, again, subscribe for more about death history and the strange ways that humans have understood mortality across time. Because history is full of amazing, remarkable people, and sometimes we just have to dig a little deeper to find them. That pun was very intended. So if you like this video, give it a like, subscribe, leave me a comment, let me know who is your favorite historical person. Let me know if you knew about Henrietta or if this is something new to you. Any suggestions of topics you'd like me to talk about, I would also really appreciate. Follow me on my other social media, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye bye!